We're getting live visuals of Prime Minister Modi and his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Bilateral talks have begun between the two countries' leaders.
दुनिया के अनेक देशों के नागरिकों को पेट्रोल डीजल के कारण बहुत बड़े संकट से गुजरना पड़ा और आज भी गुजरना पड़ रहा है, लेकिन हमारे उस कारोबार के कारण हम भारत के नागरिकों
while meeting President Putin said, and I quote, that I can assure you from my previous experiences that our relationship will be more deeper and cooperative. He said that last 5 years was a challenging period for the entire world. First, COVID conflict at various regions, which caused a lot of difficulties for the human society. And due to our relationship, I managed to meet the needs of fertilizers for my farmers. For the interest of farmers, we are committed and we would like to keep cooperating with Russia with regards to it. Prime Minister Modi speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said that with the Russian people's cooperation, India will be able to face the fuel crisis, and the world should also accept that. He thanked President Putin for giving a stable partnership between India and Russia.
रोजगार के अनेक नए अवसर बने हैं और उसके लिए अनेक क्षेत्रों में विकास के भी नए आयाम जुड़े हैं और मैं मानता हूं कि
These are live visuals coming to you from Moscow. Prime Minister Modi meeting President Vladimir Putin. The meeting is currently underway. Prime Minister Modi expressing his gratitude to Russian President Vladimir Putin and expressed his commitment to enhanced cooperation between the two countries in various sectors. He has thanked President Putin for stabilizing the relationship between both countries, and he said that we were able to face the fuel crisis and the world should accept the relations between both countries.
В сфере производства нас ждет очень хорошие перспективы в будущем, и мы уже видим результаты, и мы продолжим работу в этом направлении.
एक्सेलेंसी, वैसे तो हमारा ये जो द्विपक्षीय वार्ता का कार्यक्रम 25 साल से चल रहा है, 22 बार हम मिल चुके हैं.
These are the live visuals coming to you. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin holding talks in Moscow. Prime Minister Modi stating that since the last 25 years, his relationship with Russia has been going strong. Both countries had around 22 bilateral meetings. Prime Minister Modi is saying that it is his 6th visit to Russia, expressing the closeness of the relationship between both countries. Prime Minister Modi highlighted the challenges that he faced in the last 5 years, as well as the entire world, first with COVID-19, the conflict at various regions which caused difficulties for humankind, and he has thanked President Putin for the extension of support given to India. Both countries have decided to take their bilateral relations forward at this point in time. Prime Minister Modi, remember, is on a 2-day visit to Russia for the 22nd India-Russia annual summit. Earlier in the day, he had laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier in Moscow. Earlier on, Prime Minister Modi last visited Russia back in 2019 at the far eastern port of Vladivostok, meeting Putin way back then. He also met Putin in 2022 at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Uzbekistan. Both leaders are now currently holding bilateral talks. Remember, Prime Minister Modi is on a 2-day visit to Russia, and this is the 22nd India-Russia annual summit. Live visuals on your screen of that key bilateral meeting between both leaders. Some of the big highlights of this meeting: Russia has decided to discharge and facilitate the return of all Indians working in the Russian army. That's one of the key highlights of this two-day meeting. Joining me on the broadcast is Principal Correspondent Siddharth Sibal. Siddharth, take us through the meeting currently underway between President Putin and Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Well, the key meeting, something we all were waiting for some time now, has started. The annual India-Russia summit. We have seen the opening remarks of both the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, the significant comments made by the Indian Prime Minister, first is the interest of the Indian farmers. Now, Russia is a major provider of fertilizers, and for that the Indian Prime Minister thanked the Russian President for keeping the cooperation going. The second, of course, is something that is well known, the increased import of Russian crude oil, the Russian energy, something we have seen since the start of the conflict in 2022. And this was mentioned by the Indian Prime Minister, who said that when it comes to the energy cooperation, that safeguarded the Indian consumer from high inflationary pressure that lead to social stability as well. So key comments on those issues, but essentially the Prime Minister started by making comments on the issue of terrorism. He, of course, condemned the terror attacks in Russia and talked about how India has been dealing the same problem for last 40 years. Now, this is the third meeting of both the leaders in last 24 hours. Earlier, both met at the pavilion, and yesterday we saw those visuals of the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the retreat which happened. And essentially, we know one of the big outcomes of that retreat is the Indians in the Russian army will be allowed to go home. This is something that has been an issue for India for some time now, and India has been pressing Moscow for an early discharge. Now, roughly around 40 Indians are there in the Russian army so far. 10 Indians have been brought back, and there have been confirmed death of 4 Indians. And this was an issue that India was talking about for a long time. And of course, when it comes to other outcomes, we saw the diaspora event as well, where, of course, the Indian Prime Minister made the big announcement of opening up of the 2 diplomatic missions in Russia, in Kazan and Yekaterinburg. We are awaiting for more comments and reactions from across the world to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Moscow. We have already seen reaction coming from Kyiv, where, of course, the Ukrainian president has made the remarks. But all in all, if we look at the comments by the Indian Prime Minister, he termed the Russian President Vladimir Putin as a friend. He talked about, of course, how there have been conversations between the two sides on various areas, whether it is defense, investments, and this is expected to be part of the conversations. We have seen the opening remarks, but let me recall the Prime Minister's remarks at the diaspora event, where the Indian Prime Minister talked about how essentially, when it comes to this relationship, it is a relationship which has a lot of trust. In fact, he recalled a famous Indian song which talks about the wearing the Russian hat and the heart being Indian. So essentially, a lot of developments from Moscow today.
Siddharth Sibal joining us live from Moscow. Siddharth, do track for us the latest developments coming up from that meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.